Meet the Transfers Kansas State edition. I should have worn my actual Kansas State home field shirt, but I got the purple on, so at least that's nice. I am personally very invested in this group. We're doing our transfer class rankings. Kansas State slots in at fifth overall. I had them seventh, so this is a little bit higher than I had them. You had them sixth, same thing. Feels about right, but we're
Yeah,
gonna go player by player here and give you our expectations for each guy. I'll start with a couple questions broadly for you, though. It's an 8-man class. Do you think that Jerome Tang did what he set out to do with this transfer class?
I think so. I mean, he's got a brand new starting lineup pretty much from this, which is what Kansas State needed. Added some bench depth as well. Yeah, I think so. He's got some guys to build around. He knows the formula. Yeah.
I think it's a yes with an asterisk on it that I'm very skeptical of certain guys, and more on that later. But my read on the way this was built was the season ended and everyone involved was like, we're blowing the whole thing up. Okay, so everybody leaves. Great. You now have what, 8 scholarships to work with to build a whole new team. And I'm sure they had a budget of X amount of dollars that we're going to work with. I assume that budget's very high based on the fact that they got Coleman Hawkins late in the cycle and some other guys. I think Kansas State had money and spots. And
Yep.
I don't know that they picked the right names to spend that money on. They got a new team, but this is the most volatile team in the country. They could be number 3 in the sport come January, and I won't be surprised. They could have a losing record in January, and I won't be surprised at all.
We're going to talk about what they could have done differently. I think it's spending that money sooner. I do think this is a good transfer class, but they kind of got lucky with the guys who were still available
Yeah.
later on in the cycle. Then they had some money to blow. I do think there were, let's just say, more steady options that they could have spent that money on earlier on in the cycle. It all ended up working out for Kansas State, but I do think if they were more decisive in their actions early on in the portal process, they could have a similar transfer class without the volatility that you mentioned.
Yeah, or just make it a mix. Give me like 3 volatile guys and 5 solid pieces. And I honestly, we'll go through it, but I think like 7 of these 8 guys are extremely volatile for various reasons. What's one thing that could have made it better? I just said what could have been better. I want stability, and there is none.
Yeah,
What do you think they could have done differently?
yeah. It's getting getting more stable players earlier on,
Yeah,
using that money early and
yeah.
jumping on some of those guys that were available earlier on that don't come with the baggage and questions that many of these do.
Yep. Okay, we're very aligned. Let's get into the players. First up is Baye from Arkansas. Anytime you can pluck somebody who averaged 0.8 points a game in the worst locker room in college basketball history, you got to do it. This speaks exactly to what my point is, though, Brian. Like Baye,
Yeah.
I think projects as a complete role player, and you got one of the strangest volatile role players you could. Now, I think he's a talented kid for sure, but completely unproven at this point from one of the worst teams in college basketball last season.
They needed depth, and you can say this is a depth piece. Guy who's on a power conference team, has that some of that experience. He is going to go back and forth, I think, between being a non-factor and being somebody who plays 10 minutes per game, just based on matchups and how things go. But I'm not expecting much from him this season.
Yeah, I'm going to call him a non-factor. He's in between that and a role player. I think he'll get some chances early off the bench, but I just am not expecting him to factor in. Next up on the list is Ugonna Onyenso from Kentucky, which is probably surprising that out of 8 players, he's the second one we're naming in terms of production last year, scaling up from little to most. But this, I think, could be a starter on Kansas State. I'm interested where you're going to project his role. Numbers were not great for Kentucky. 3 points, 4 rebounds in 18 minutes, but he essentially beat out Aaron Bradshaw and Big Z by the end of the season, and it was largely, almost entirely, due to what he brought defensively. He is one of the very best shot blockers in all of college basketball. I don't think he does anything else but block shots, though. What do you think his role will be, and what do you expect?
He is going to be that rim protector, lob catcher. Like, that's going to be his role, and I think that's going to get him in the starting lineup at the start of the season, at the very least, because Kansas State's going to need some of that defense at the rim, and he provides it as well as anybody in the country. The reason I say at the start of the season is because I know we're going to talk about Achor Achor here in a second. But if he translates from Samford and he can also bring the earn protection with the stuff he does offensively as well, then Onyenso is going to need to be more than just a shot blocker. But at the start of the season, I think he can pencil him as a starting five.
Yeah, I mean, you rip Kentucky starting center away. Most schools would think he's going to start. I'm going to call him a role player, and I could very well be wrong. He might be a starter on this team. His defense might matter that much, but I am assuming that where Jerome Tang will get with this team is a front court of Hawkins and Achor Achor. That's sort of what I'm rooting for, and I think that would relegate big ooh, as we call him, obviously, to the bench. But he's a good role player no matter what, and a defensive stopper for sure. They're going to need that because some of these guys, in my opinion, don't defend. And Big Oo certainly defends. Next up on
Yeah.
the list is Brendan Hausen. Once again, let's pluck guys from losing programs. Okay. Villanova's own. He averaged 6 points a game in 17 minutes for Nova last year. Did shoot 38% from three. I think he absolutely projects as a quality shooter at minimum. Won't be shocked if he starts. Won't be shocked if he's a non-factor. What role do you anticipate for Hausen?
That's why I'm going with role player right in the middle of there. His shooting's going to give him a role, right? Whether that's putting him in the starting lineup as your fourth or fifth offensive option because of that shooting, provide some spacing, or you prefer to have him on the bench because he's not one of your five most talented players. I think Jerome Tang can play with that, and he may be a spot starter. He may have both roles, but he's certainly not going to be like one of your top impact guys. If he is, that's a major concern. So I'm slotting him in as a role player.
Okay. That feels right to me too. I think he's like an off the bench shooter type, at least if Kansas State is the best version of themselves. I think that's it. I don't think Hausen as like your starting shooting guard means you're a great team. It could happen because they do need the shooting, but I will be surprised. I think he would be best suited as a role player. Next up on the list is looks like Christian Jones from Illinois Chicago, averaged 11 points a game, played 33 minutes. Pretty dependable player. 6'5" guard. I would assume for Kansas State, I think he's probably an off-ball secondary guy, but man, he can pass it. 4.8 assists last
Mm-hmm.
year. I like Christian Jones. I'll speak more on it in a second, but what's your take on him?
I do too. I think he gives you some versatility, and whether you slot him or Howson into the starting lineup, I think just depends on matchups and what Jerome Tang wants to do, and how well Jones translates up to Kansas State. Quite honestly, but you're looking at somebody who can play make and can shoot, right? That's going to get you a spot, particularly as a secondary playmaker. Doug McDaniel is going to be the guy. We'll talk about him in a little bit, but there is certainly a role for Jones, whether that's leading the second unit or relying more on his shooting next to Doug on the court.
Christian Jones's passing is going to impact this team. How big of an impact, I don't know. But you mentioned it. Doug McDaniel's the primary ball handler. Doug McDaniel can do a lot of spectacular things on the basketball court, and he can do a lot of horrific things in the classroom. But passing is not one of either of those two. Like he's just not. He's not a horrible passer. He had 4.5 assists on a Michigan team that had nobody around him, but that's not his game. Doug is wired to go score and get you 20, and he will do that a ton of times this year. I think the only player on this team that I think is wired to really be a solid, productive passer is Christian Jones. And I think because of that, he's going to find his way onto the floor. He can shoot it too. I don't think he's a bad defender by any means. And he's dependable. He played a bazillion minutes. I think by the end of the season, he's a starter on this team. He's the one guy I'm really buying stock in, and I will like Kansas State more if he's the starting shooting guard. Next on the list is Coleman Hawkins. Friend of the show, by the way. Go watch the NBA draft show with Coleman Hawkins. We love Coleman. We've had quite a relationship with him through the years. The $2 million man, allegedly, the highest paid player in the country, let alone in this class. I'm excited to see him in a new system because Illinois, I think they helped him, but he was the third wheel next to Marcus Damask and Terrence Shannon, and they really asked a lot of him. They asked him to guard Zach Edey and the Big Ten bigs, and he's not a center. He's a four. He's a stretch four, and he did an admirable job. His basketball IQ is through the roof. He's a beloved player when he's on. There is some downside to Coleman's game as well, though. What's your read on what he's going to be for Kansas State?
I think he's going to be a star. I think it is easy to slot him into
Star.
I do. I
Wow.
think it's easy to slot him into the Keontae Johnson role from 2 years ago and be that guy in the front court. And that team, we all talk about Marquise Noel. Johnson was that team's leading scorer. He averaged like 18 points per game that season. And Kansas State does not have their lead eight runner as successful as they are if Johnson is not incredible. I think Jerome Tang is going to find ways to use Hawkins' ability to score from all three levels, along with his passing and vision, and just you mentioned his high basketball IQ. They're going to find ways to utilize him, I think, every trip down the court, or just about every trip down the court. He's going to be the number one and number two option on this team. I think you can look at Doug as being number one based on just the way Jerome Tang's teams have been since he's been at Kansas State. They've had that lead guard that has led the charge. But Hawkins to me is like that 1A.
Okay. I hope that happens. I really do. And I won't be stunned. Coleman's capable of that. And he may be asked to be a first or second option on this team. I think the thing that will benefit him most is going back to playing his natural position. Play the 4, maybe even slide down, play some 3. He has guard skills, believe me. But he's got to be asked to not guard centers anymore. Illinois' defense was horrible. Coleman's rim protection was part of it. And it just didn't work. And that's why Onyenso could be a really good pairing with him. I think Achor Achor works next to him as well. But to me, he's a starter and a very, very good one. And I hope they don't ask him to be more than that, because I think if Coleman's your second option, I think you're awesome. If he's your third option, I think you're even better. If he's your first option, I have some questions about what that would look like for his one season in Manhattan. Next up, we are moving to this would be Max Jones, Cal State Fullerton, 15 points a game last year, 38.5% from 3, 6'5" guard. What do you make of Max?
Bench score, role player. I think there's a scenario he starts due to the 3 or 2 of the 3 as well. But he's going to be either a secondary option with the starters or one of those guys who can potentially lead your bench unit from a scoring standpoint. Again, just going to depend on the lineup that Jerome Tang wants to use. I do think that particularly at those wing spots, there are different options that Tang can enjoy and tinker with. And this is just another one of those pieces.
I think, to me, if you're building lineups with this team, you're picking 2 out of Hausen, Jones, and Jones, like Max and Christian Jones. And I think Max is the best scorer pretty clearly, and I trust his shot, I think, the most. So for that reason, I'll pencil him in as a starter. Won't be surprised if he kind of goes in and out of the lineup as a starter, but if he can just be a 5th option floor spacer and help Doug and Coleman create offense, then I think that's a good role for him and it can work.
Here's what you think of if you're Tang, though, is if you just gonna have a 5th option. Would you rather have Hausen be that 5th option who just stands in the corner and shoots, and then you have Jones coming off the bench and having a more prominent role in his minutes?
True.
Or do you just go with your best 5 on the court? Right.
It's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I don't think you could go wrong either way, to be honest.
Right.
And it might change. It might fluctuate as the season goes on, but that's a good point. All right, into the 2 quote unquote superstars here, at least from a production standpoint, scoring last year. Achor Achor from Samford, one of the more unique, unorthodox players in the country. If you watched Samford last year, Buckyball, it was quite an interesting offense. They almost completed that crazy comeback against Kansas in the NCAA tournament. Achor Achor, 16 points, 6 rebounds, 6'9" big man. He shot 43% from 3. The shot is quirky looking, to say the least, but if this translates, people are going to love Achor Achor. I have him as a starter because I think at some point it's going to become him and Coleman Hawkins. What do you think Achor is going to do for Kansas State?
I think kind of the flip we talked about with Onyenso. I think he is going to be a role player to start, but it wouldn't shock me if he's a starter by the end of the season. What he brings from a rim protection standpoint is going to earn him a spot. His playmaking is going to earn him a spot. It's how much the offense comes along and what he can do from a scoring standpoint. And if the defense maintains the level he was at playing in the SoCon, where he was an elite SoCon defender, he brings a little bit more versatility, I think, too. He's not just a rim protector. He can move out on the perimeter. But again, there's some projection from a mid-major conference to the Big 12 now. So I'm going to have him start as a role player. There's a good chance he's a starter by the end of the year.
I'm going to say starter, and I debated star for him here. Look, I love Coleman. I really do. What would be best for this team to me would be if Coleman is actually the third best player and Doug and Achor are carrying the offense. If you're doing the whole Marquise Noel, Keontae Johnson thing, could Achor be the scorer in the front court and let Coleman just kind of be his unique, quirky third self? I think it could happen. To me, Kansas State is going to depend on Achor to be that, to get back to the NCAA tournament. Like if Achor is a bust and it doesn't work, I don't like this roster enough. I just don't.
Yeah.
But if he's good, he could be great. I think he's a starter year round and somewhere in between bust and superstar is what I'm expecting. And then the final name, God dang it, we've waited this long for it, Brian. Doug McDaniel, Nasir McDaniel himself. There is not a bigger fan of Doug McDaniel on the planet than me back in last November. I invented the Chug McDaniel. When Doug McDaniel had 20 points and 8 assists, we would chug in his honor, and he was doing it a lot last season at the beginning of the year. There's nobody more electric when he's on. I called him Marquise Noel, the musical. It literally felt like a more fun version of the most fun guard I've seen in 20 years. And lost in that is the fact he can be a great offensive player. He can carry a team offensively any given night. We don't know what it looks like as far as winning. And he has a lot of losing habits, both on and off the basketball floor. He doesn't defend. He barely goes to class. You got to fix it. It's volatile. But if he becomes the best version of himself, I think there's an All-American somewhere in here. And we've seen Jerome Tang do it before. So what do you expect from Doug McDaniel?
I expect him to be a star. You mentioned that he doesn't have a lot of winning habits. I will ask you what was happening when Michigan was ranked 3 weeks into the season, a month into the season.
Well,
Doug was awesome.
a variety of things were happening at that point. But yes, the loudest one was that Doug was awesome. We thought we had a superstar on our hands.
The loudest one was that Doug was awesome. And then all of the class stuff started happening. And I think that really derailed Michigan and Michigan season. And that's not the only thing, but that was one of the things that derailed it. I also think that some of that's a standpoint of maybe Doug not handling that success the best. And sometimes you need to kind of, take one on the chest, say that was me, and get back to it. And I think this is his chance to reset. He's going to a coach who knows how to get the most out of ball dominant guards, ball dominant small guards, like Doug is. He, I think, is going to have his best season. It wouldn't shock me if he's an all Big 12 player. Wouldn't shock me if he was an All American.
I'm going to say star as well because I like my guy still and I'm rooting for him. I know people probably don't believe that. Like I wouldn't either, but I am rooting hard for Doug McDaniel. I hope it works because there isn't a more fun player in the country when it works. I'm going to say he's a star just because that's what my heart wants him to be. If I'm being honest, I don't think he's capable of the consistency. I just don't. And you mentioned what about when Michigan was ranked? I don't know that actually happened. Like they may have been in a poll, but if you go back to
I ranked them.
Okay,
They were awesome.
them.
They were awesome.
Yeah, I think, and Rob Doster was doing Michigan's a Big Ten favorite, I think. Like it happens. But I think if you go back through his game logs individually were special. Let me just read you the beginning of his season. 22 points against UNC Asheville, win. 16 points against Youngstown State, win. 26 points against St. John's, win. That was the game. They smoked St. John's in Madison Square Garden. And it was him and Namari Burnett looked great. You're thinking everybody on Michigan's good. Namari never played well again. And the next 5 games after that, no, the next 6 games after the St. John's performance, here's Doug, the next 6 games. 20 points, they lose at home to Long Beach State. He also has 6 turnovers. 13 points against Memphis. He's 5 for 15 from the floor. They lose in the battle for Atlantis. 20 points against Stanford. They survive. 20 points against Texas Tech, they lose, get blown out. 30 points against Oregon in overtime, they lose. 24 points against Indiana at home, they lose. They lose 5 of the next 6. Now, Doug offensively was great, but there is a legitimate question, even if Doug is all here mentally.
Mhm.
Can you build the team around him with the first option and win basketball games? I still don't think we know that because he was still stellar at that point in the season, and Michigan was 4-5 through 9 games. And I tend to believe it's a mix of both. He was starting next to Terrence Williams, Namari Burnett, and Terrace Reed, who I don't think is a high major starter. Dan Hurley might, but I don't know. And you can blame the teammates as much as you can put some on Doug. But the other part of this is he's not a zero defensively. He's a negative defensively. He doesn't guard. He never will guard. There isn't that element of his game. He does take some very boneheaded shots. Like he'll shoot with 20 seconds on the shot clock from the elbow. He'll take himself completely out of plays. And it's fun, like I said. But what made Marquise Noel special was not just that he was fun. It was that at times Noel acted like a basketball genius. Like there would be a night he goes for 30, and then there'd be a night he goes for 20 assists. Doug is out to get 30. That's what Doug will give you. So if this team's going to be special, it's going to be on Coleman and Achor to help him, carry him. And maybe that happens, but it's in between for me. So I'm going to say he's a star because if it works, the numbers will be that. But I can say this, truthfully, Jerome Tang is risking his career on Doug McDaniel. I mean, that's as point blank as I can say it. And 2 years ago, he was the hottest name on the coaching cycle. Everybody wanted him. If you haven't noticed, Brian, a lot of jobs came open in the last year. How many was Jerome Tang seriously considered for?
Not as much.
Maybe one, maybe Arkansas, depending on whose reports you believe. Wasn't getting a call from Louisville. Wasn't getting a call from Michigan. Wasn't getting a call from Ohio State. Wasn't getting a call from Kentucky. So now your pivot from that after a disappointing season is give me Doug McDaniel as my star. It is a scary proposition, Brian, and I hope it works because I'm rooting for him, but I'd be nervous if I'm a Kansas State fan.
I think all that is fair. I will say from the positive standpoint, two things. If you are Jerome Tang and you need a small lead guard to lead your system, because that's what we've seen him have success with and what he likes. It's a small lead guard. Doug McDaniel is about as good of an option as you could have that was available. And if you're Doug McDaniel, where else would you rather go than a coach who has thrived with guards who play similar to you?
Yeah, you're right. No,
if it's going to work from either standpoint, this is the scenario where it's going to work.
You're completely right. Now it's not just basketball volatility, man. Coleman's been a guy who's been around some bad locker rooms. It wasn't his fault, but like Coleman doesn't really beat around the bush, right? If something's wrong,
right,
you're going to hear about it publicly from Coleman. Isn't there a world where like Doug is dropping the ball again off the court and people are a little annoyed and maybe Coleman, the $2 million man, is loudly annoyed? Like there's basketball concerns about implosion and then there's off-court concerns about implosion just personality-wise with this group. And look, man, I'm not saying the rest of Michigan's team were angels last year, but I think you could ask a lot of Michigan teammates how they feel about Doug McDaniel. They wouldn't have many good things to say. So
sure.
I don't know, man. We'll see. I hope it works. God, this class is insane. Who do you think the best player is at the end of next season?
I think it's Doug. I think we're going to have the best versus most valuable debate with Doug and Coleman.
I think Doug was the most talented last year on Michigan, but by the end of the year, Olivier Kamal was the best player. And for that reason, I'm going to say it's Coleman. I just trust Coleman more. Who do you think gets the most better? Who improves the most over the course of next season?
Achor Achor. Again, I think he starts coming off the bench and doesn't surprise me if he is a starter and a significant contributor by the end of the season.
I like that shout. I'm in between. I'm going to go Christian Jones. I think by the end of the year, he's like a really dependable backcourt piece when that's my big concern with the starters. And final question, give me a hot take.
I think Kansas State makes the second weekend.
Wow. That would be special. And it would save Jerome Tang's job. I would love that.
His job's not in jeopardy, but you're talking about him, like his standpoint of being considered one of the best coaches in the country.
Are we sure the job's not in jeopardy?
He made the Elite Eight one of his 2 years at the school.
What happened to Juwan Howard?
It took a couple years after that.
Juwan Howard went.
And
We're 2 years removed from a Sweet 16 for Juwan right now.
yeah, well,
He had two.
is this team going to win?
I,
Is this team going to win 9 games?
Brian, the path of second weekend missed tournament bubble team. Doug McDaniel's my point guard. That's
Is this
what
team
got
gonna
Juwan Howard fired.
Is this team going to win 9 games?
I think there's a world that happens. I do. I'm not going to say that because I like Coleman. I think he's good enough, and I think they got other good players. But like, yeah, it's that volatile. They're in the Big 12, dog. This could be the worst team in the Big 12, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. If Doug can't be eligible in February, yes, they'll be that bad.
You can also be a mid-tier Big 12 team or a bottom half Big 12 team and be a top 25 team in the country.
I get it, but again, I said a year ago, Juwan Howard was risking his career on Caleb Love. Now he's with the Nets. I think Jerome Tang's one more implosion season away from that. We'll see. My hot take is not that Jerome Tang will get fired. I love you, Jerome Tang. My hot take is that Christian Jones is the second best player on this team by the end of the season.
I like it.
I really buy him. I think he's going to be great and dependable, and that's all they need, some stability. Thanks for watching this video. We got 20 more Meet the Transfers in the series up on the channel now. Car, you know what I love about you?
That I'm handsome?
You're reliable. I can count on you. You know, honestly, you remind me of Aaron Henry a little bit. Remember when, like, you know, their back was against the wall, nothing was going right, and man just showed up every day. He didn't make excuses. There were no problems. There were just solutions.
Sounds like me.
That's you. And it also reminds me of Duncan Mechanical Solutions, because if you're looking for quality furnace repair, look no further than the heating and air experts that you can trust. Comfort and quality are their standard. They're an HVAC company that serves Northeast Indiana and Southern Michigan, whether it's heating and air conditioning, plumbing, kitchen and bath remodeling, or emergency services when you need them most. Duncan Mechanical Solutions has reliable service that you can count on. Cart, remember when your basement almost exploded?
I remember when my basement almost exploded. I remember when my furnace itself was acting funny. I remember when my AC was acting funny. I wish I had Duncan in my back pocket. I wouldn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been anywhere in Northern Indiana or Southern Michigan that hasn't been perfectly cool or perfectly warm, depending on when the day called for. And that's because of Duncan Mechanical Solutions. They are the presenting sponsor for the month of July. Shout out to Duncan Mechanical Solutions. Go to duncanmechanicalsolutions.com to learn more.